mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Fred Wergeles. I'm the webinar coordinator for the SLA Competitive Intelligence Division. And welcome to our webinar, CI Across the Seas, Cross-Border Research with Arthur Weiss. First off, we'd like to thank Aurora WDC for hosting our webinar today and providing all the technical guidance that we require for this webinar. Before we start, I'd like to cover a few things. For those of you on the phone, your lines will be muted. Please ask questions in the Q&A window that's on your screen, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and a slide deck will be provided later on. So thank you for taking the opportunity to catch this presentation live. Please feel free to use social media during the webinar and after the webinar. And the Twitter hashtag for the webinar is hashtag SLACID. And Arthur's handle is @AwareCI. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Arthur Weiss is CEO of Aware, specializing in European competitive and market intelligence research, analysis, and training. He teaches the Institute of Competitive Intelligence's online research workshop and has written numerous articles on CI and online research, and has led workshops on CI across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, South Africa, as well as the USA. Arthur has been a member of SLA since 2009 and holds an MBA and a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry. Turn it over to you, Arthur.
Okay. I don't know where everybody is, so I'll say good morning, good evening, enjoy your lunch break. And I think that's the first thing to realize, that when you're doing cross-border research, there are different time zones, everything can be different. What to expect, the difference between the East Coast and the West Coast of the USA is a lot more variation when you go further afield. So I'm going to, the first slide, I have to move my panel thing. I've got 4 quotations here on the importance of global search and how things are differing. My favorite one is the last one. Globalization has made national boundaries more porous, but not irrelevant, nor does globalization mean the creation of a universal community. But the Jack Welch quotation, I think, is also important, because what Jack Welch is saying is that if you're a global company, you have to be able to search the world, whether you're looking for sources to sell, intellectual capital, ideas, it doesn't matter what, searching is important. For those who don't know who Joseph Nye was, he's a political scientist, former dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and was a member of faculty going back to sort of 1964. He's sort of famous for neoliberalism and looking at power independence and things like that. So why is global search needed? These are just some of the applications you might want to look at. So if your company is looking for foreign business and you want to know about competitors overseas in a different market, or you're looking for suppliers, or you're looking for customers, or you want to look for expansion, a merger and acquisition opportunity, you might have heard of a new technology, what's going on there, who's developing it, new ideas, how are things done differently? Or is an overseas competitor looking at your market? So you want to identify business threats. Is somebody overseas or in a different market doing better than you are? How are they doing it? What do you need to look at? Are they really doing it? Are they really better? Or are they actually worse and it just looks better? Those are, I think, the main sort of areas that people looking at competitive intelligence are going to be focusing on. But of course, if you're looking at academic research, research is pretty much global, or it should be global. I'll come to that soon. And then there's personal applications. You want to take a holiday in Vietnam. What can you see there? Where should you stay? Are you doing genealogy research? And of course, from an intelligence perspective, especially today, in today's world, it's really important to know what's going on. I know you can take sort of the view that was expressed recently, let's close our borders to everybody who's Muslim. But does that really work? Or maybe it's just a question of saying, right, who is good, who is bad? So there's lots of applications and lots of needs for global search. The problem is it's not easy. The first bullet, language. If you want to try this out, put it in the chat box. Do you know what those languages are? I've got 8 languages, or even what the last one is in Latin characters. A lot of websites aren't in English. If you're searching for information, it's not in English. It won't always be translated. Even if there's an English translation, it's not always the full translation. So if you're looking at a competitor website, they may have an English variation or English version, but it's not going to be the full site. Then there's comparability. And if anyone wants to put the answers in the chat box, I'll come back to them later for, so I'll give you a chance. Why do cars go more miles per gallon in the UK than they do in the USA? Why is underage drink driving a bigger problem in the USA than Europe? And then there's accuracy. Do you actually trust statistics? Do you trust your own country unemployment statistics, as an example? Well, if you don't trust your own one, can you trust anybody else's? How do things change? And finally, and probably the most important when you're searching cross-border, is what information is available. You can't make an assumption that what's available in the USA is going to be available in Europe and vice versa. There's data that is easy to get in Europe, which is in some cases almost impossible to get, certainly online or through secondary research in the USA, but it's free in Europe, or free in some countries in Europe. So knowing these differences can make a big difference if you're doing a project looking at a company overseas or a market overseas. You need to know what's available. And to give you some examples of how these things are, we're going to look at some examples of some of these variations. The first question you need to ask is, why will information be available? Where will it be held? If you can think of reasons why information will be available, it becomes much easier to find it. If you can't think of reasons, we'll come back to that later. How could you actually find out if the information is going to be available? But there are reasons why information is available, and I've categorized them. If there's a legal requirement, then the secret is to try and find out where the repository of that legal information is going to be. There can also be an expectation that information is available. So a typical expectation is, if you're looking at a quoted company, you go onto their website, you go onto the investor part, and you can download their annual reports, their 10Ks and so on, except 10K isn't really a US term, it's not used elsewhere. So sometimes you need to know the terms. There can be cultural reasons, there can be various reasons why information is going to be available. Another key reason information will be available is what I call marketing. And marketing can be public information, it can be news, it can be message propagation, it can be propaganda, hence marketing in quotes. And is the marketing for the home market or for foreign market audiences? Why is it out there? Then there can be community and social needs. So that's where I put social media, discussion forums, blogs. And there'll be different regulations. Some people may have read recently about the fate of certain bloggers in the Middle East, like in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So blogging may not be as easy in some markets, and if it is there, can you trust it? And then there's what I call serendipity, the lucky accident, something that really shouldn't be there, and that doesn't matter whether it's international or home. Sometimes people make mistakes and upload stuff that really shouldn't be there, and I've got a sort of hit list of projects I've been involved in where I just think, why on earth was this uploaded? My favorite example is a major defense company that put a database of all their, or you could find a database of all their suppliers, including how much was spent with those suppliers over a period of years, plus the contact details of those suppliers. This database had over 2,000 names in it, or 2,000 companies. It was a major defense company, and I think it was a major boo-boo. But the reason it went up there was very obvious. Nobody realized they'd uploaded this file. If you knew how to search, you could find it. And if you're looking anywhere, that's one of the things to sort of look at. So regulations can differ. I said that things, sometimes can be surprising. There are 4 countries. If I asked people in the US, would they be happy to see their tax records as individuals made public online? And I think most people would say, no way do I want everyone to see what my tax records are. If you think the previous election, it actually became a political issue, and people were saying, we want to see Mitt Romney's tax records. And he was a bit closed in showing them. Yet there are 4 countries in the world where tax records are made available online. 3 of them are, to a certain extent, if you know their cultures, not surprising. One of them is, and it shows the differences in why information can be available. The countries where you'll see them online are the Scandinavian countries. That, to a certain extent, you'd expect. Finland, Norway, Sweden. You may only be able to obtain it if you're a Norwegian citizen, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you can obtain it if you're based in the US, although some information is available for everybody. And the reason is because there's a cultural openness. There's a belief that things like finances and money shouldn't be closed off. If you've got nothing to hide, why should you be ashamed to see what your tax records are? So the only reason that you're going to hide something like that is because you've got something to hide, because you've got something to be ashamed about. The 4th country is Pakistan. The reason Pakistan information is available is the exact opposite to the Scandinavian countries. It started off when somebody managed to find out that a lot of the members of parliament weren't paying taxes. So there was a call to make parliamentarians and public officials' taxes public. And then people said, well, what about everybody else? What about business leaders? So all taxes, all individual taxes are now made available. And you can download it. It's a massive file. It's about 50 megabyte file, listing everybody who pays tax in Pakistan, or everybody who's registered to pay tax. And the reason is to avoid corruption. So it's the exact opposite. It's not openness, it's because people were seen to be corrupt, and it's to try and stop them being corrupt. Another surprising example is India. There was a lot of problems in India where public service was viewed, or the civil service was viewed, as not particularly open, and people were seen as lazy. They would take 3-hour lunch breaks, so they'd come in late and leave early for lunch. So in India, a website was put up, attendance.gov.in, where you could see when civil servants came to work, how long they worked, what days they worked, and I think if you were working for the Food Corporation of India, the times people start work is, well, they don't start at 9 o'clock. Most of them start between 9:30 and 10, or between 10 and 11. Sounds a pretty nice life. And if you actually see, you can see that they all finish round about 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So it's a short day's work. And this is what attendance.gov.in was founded for, just so that people can actually see where their tax money was going and whether people were actually working. So the point about this is that you get different laws, different rules, different regulations in different countries. Many years ago, I did a project for a company in the US, and as is fairly normal, I had to sign the sort of standard rules and ethical codes saying that I wouldn't do any form of espionage or anything that was illegal. And the research target was a relatively small UK company. And as part of my report, I gave detailed finances, their balance sheets, their profit and loss accounts, breakdowns on their profit and loss account. And after I delivered my report, I got a call from their legal counsel in the States, pretty much saying that as I had breached the ethical terms and that I obviously wasn't ethical, they weren't going to pay me because what I was doing was espionage. And I said, hang on a second, it's a legal regulation to file that level of detailed accounts in the UK. At the time you had to pay for it, it's now free. So if you're looking at UK companies, unless they're very, very small, you can get their full finances. This is private companies, not public companies. So my company has to file accounts. As we're relatively small, we don't have to file the same level of detail as some larger companies. But if we were a $60, $70 million company, we would be filing pretty much everything, and you could find everything about us. So there are differences. Another difference is finding the names of individuals. Within the European Union, there is now a law called the right to be forgotten. The right to be forgotten says that if you feel that you've done something wrong and it was reported in the press, over time, that may no longer be relevant. And why should somebody be able to search for your name and find all this negative stuff about you? So you can go to Google. It's pretty much only Google, as Google has over 90% market share in Europe, much higher than in the USA, where I think Bing has about 25%. You go to Google and say, please remove my name from searches if you do this search. So you name the search and you name the website you want to be removed. And if you put those keywords in, that site won't come up. That's the current situation. It's going to be extending so that if you search on google.com, the same rules will apply. At the moment, if you search on google.com, you find things that you won't find on google.co.uk because of this right to be forgotten. So I've got an example here of a certain person called Margaret MacDonald, and Axel Guerin, and the word scandalous. And I'm deliberately misspelling McDonald's so that you actually see the whole Google screen. There's only one result, that misspelling. If I search on google.com, I get two results. The BBC News article has gone. And that's because somebody named, and you don't normally know who it is, somebody named in that BBC News article asked for that site to be removed. And when you see what the newspaper article is, I suspect it's Axel Guerin, but I don't know for certain, and we won't know, because this is the news article. It's a story about a British woman who was running a prostitution ring in Europe, and one of the people she was friendly with who used to work for was somebody called Axel Guerin, and she was innocent. She was basically just a friend. There was nothing wrong with it. She objected to the case, and so she was interviewed. Now, if you searched on her name, I wouldn't be at all surprised if she wasn't happy, if she was very unhappy for her name to appear. It could be the lawyer as well. There could be a number of people who were named. So there's Emmanuel Marsigny was also named. Maybe it was him. I don't know. Sometimes the right to be forgotten is really unusual. Why is somebody being removed? So in this case, somebody called Fiona Godwin Brown and Duncan Clerkin. And nobody knows why these people were removed, but there's two results. And if you look on google.com or google.ca, anything outside the European Union, you get three results for that particular search. And it was very obvious that the article concerned the people had been interviewed. They were quite willing to be have their photo and images shown, but maybe after a few years they felt they didn't want it. They regretted being interviewed. They regretted the article, so they asked for it to be removed. So if you're going to be searching, it's one of the times, normally I'd say search using the local search engine. So search using google.fr for France, google.co.uk for the UK, google.de for Germany. If you're looking for individuals, search using google.com as well. You may find differences. I talked about availability. The next thing is to think about that there are parts of the world where there are not that many internet users as a percentage of the population. If there isn't that much internet usage as a percentage of the population, if most of it's, for instance, on Facebook using a mobile phone, then there's no need or no reason to put up lots and lots of database information, lots of information that would be useful for competitive intelligence, because nobody's going to look at it. So obviously in North America, where the penetration is very high, and in most of Europe and Central Asia it's pretty high, you're going to get a lot of information. But if you're looking at parts of South Asia, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, or Sub-Saharan Africa, it's very, very low. So you're not likely to find very much information. And it's worth being aware of that. It means if somebody asks you to find information on some of these countries, you have to go the old route and go back to primary research. You may use the online systems and online sources to try and find people to speak to and some information, but primary research is still king for those sort of areas. Here's a situation for Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. And some countries are quite high, like South Africa, Seychelles, Mauritius, Kenya, Nigeria. But when you get to countries like Ethiopia, Mozambique, Ghana, Botswana, it's much, much lower. You can look at this in other ways as well. And there's an excellent series of, an excellent website that actually gives a lot of these. It's from the Oxford Internet Institute, based in Oxford University, UK. And they give a number of maps giving internet population and internet penetration, and that's another way of seeing where you're likely to find information. So this is a map of the world showing the importance or the number of people, the population, versus the penetration. So in the USA, you've got over 80% or Canada, you've got over 80% penetration, USA 60 to 80, but India under 20% penetration. At the same time, the population in India is so absolutely massive, we're talking about 1 billion people, that even though the penetration is low, there's still a very high internet population. If you look at Great Britain, GBR, that's disproportionately large for the size of the country. China, again, low penetration, but lots and lots of people using the internet, mostly on mobile phones. If you look at Africa, apart from South Africa and Nigeria, Egypt, Morocco, the internet's hardly used, which means if you're looking for those sort of information in those countries, there's not going to be very much online. This is a completely different image. This doesn't look so much at mobile phone usage. This looks at routers that are connected to the internet at the time this research was done. Essentially, it was done by pinging pretty much every single known IP address to find out what responded and where the response came from. And again, it shows very visibly where you get this, where people are using the internet. And the big blacks, of course, again, Africa and large parts of Asia. Australia, it looks as though it's pretty black, but that's because most of that's the Australian outback in the middle and nobody lives there other than kangaroos. Another view is the geography of top-level domain names. And apart from the previous one, all of these come from the Oxford Institute, Internet Institute. And as you wouldn't be surprised at, the US and Europe is where, and to a lesser extent, China, Japan, Australia, and India, is where most top-level domain names are registered. If that's where they're registered, that's going to suggest that's where the information is going to be found. If you do a search for names where you put in United States, USA, and variations, or Canada, or Great Britain, United Kingdom, and find out how many hits you get on Google, this is another way. And again, it shows that when you're talking about Africa and a lot of Asia, very little comes up. If you're looking at user-generated content, so you're looking for blogs, United States, Germany, United Kingdom dominate. Wikipedia articles. There are more Wikipedia articles written about topics or countries or towns or areas within Europe than pretty much everywhere else. Again, it shows how international information is not even, and if you're looking for some areas, you're going to find it tough. If you're looking for Canada, the USA, parts of Australia, possibly South Africa, China, India, you'll find stuff. But for other places, you won't. The same applies to academic knowledge. So the point about these is that there is a lot of variation internationally, and assuming that what you find in your own country is going to apply elsewhere is just not true. You cannot make that assumption. There are differences. What you find may be very different to what you can find in your local country or local market, and it may not be available, it may not be comparable, it may not be as accurate, and you need to take all of that into account. So what about finding information? Well, I've mentioned about google.fr, google.ca, google.co.uk. So what countries are you looking at? What's the best search engine to use? And should you search in English or should you search in the local language? And if you're translating, is that translation accurate? It's always worth doing a back translation. Also think of alternative spellings, idioms, synonyms, because sometimes that can make a big difference. And I'm going to come to that in a second. If you're searching in China and you can get things translated, try using Baidu. It's the dominant search engine in China. If any of you have visited China, unless you have a VPN, you can't even use Google. Google essentially is blocked in China. In languages, in Cyrillic countries, so Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, consider using Yandex if you're searching in a Cyrillic language. And the reason is because Yandex is designed for those languages. The grammar and the way words are used, Google won't cope with it. Just as a simple example, people's names, if you're a woman, it's going to be ending in A. So Mrs. Putin is not Mrs. Putin, it's Putina with an A at the end. I think Google copes with that. But if it's somebody who's less common, and you think of the person's name without the A at the end, you're not going to find it on Google, whereas you would with Yandex. South Korea is never. Most other countries use a local language version of Google. There are a few other local language search engines, but apart from those three, Google is pretty much dominant. There are also a number of specialist local search directories. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because Google is now pretty much dominant, local search directories tend not to be updated. They tend not to be as accurate, but I'll come to that in a second. Google Translate is pretty good. Just translate back, so put something in and then translate it backwards to make sure it works. There are a number of other free translation tools, translate.com, freetranslation.com, and some of these will link to professional translators, so you can actually pay to get what you're looking at translated. If you're in China, use Bing.com translator because Google Translate don't work. So here's an example of how search engines differ, and I'm using the word aluminium. And the reason I'm using the word aluminium is because that is pretty much what the metal is called everywhere in the world other than the US, where for some reason the US misses out the letter I. So in the US it's aluminum, and everywhere else it's aluminium. If you search for aluminium, you get different results to if you search for aluminum. The point about this is make sure you know what you're searching and what the local term is. If you search for aluminum, you're pretty much saying, I want my results to be dominated by the US, and you will not find very much non-US type information. So if I look at aluminium, straight away I get the Australian Financial Review and London Metal Exchange. So I'm seeing international stuff just because I'm using an international spelling. But the differences go further, because let's have a look what happens if we change the language. Here I'm searching in Arabic, and I'm searching on google.com, and I'm putting the Arabic word for aluminium, and still most of what comes up is English, because Google translates aluminium in Arabic into English. If I search on google.ae, which is essentially the Google for the Gulf states, so Dubai, Abu Dhabi, areas like that, a lot fewer results, a fraction of what I get in English, but they're all Arabic. So they're going to be more relevant for an Arabic search. Now, I'm not sure whether aluminium is going to be the best example there, but if I was searching for oil or anything like that, search in Arabic and you might find completely different information if you were searching in English. Same applies for Russia. Here I'm searching Yandex versus Google Russia, or sorry, google.com, and I'm putting the Russian for aluminium in, and in Yandex I get 18 million results. In Google I only get just under 4 million, and again completely different. Do the same in Chinese. Baidu, you get, it says somewhere, you get 100 million, and Google, you only get 31 million. So the point is, before you even start looking, think about the language, think about your search tool, where you're going to be searching. Don't be consistent, don't be routine. Just because it works for the home market doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere else. I said there were search directories. Often these aren't updated. Sometimes they're just yellow pages or white pages. But if you're looking for a local search directory, it's a place to go. It's a website created by Stephen Arnold. I'm not sure how often he maintains it. There were a few others that I used to use, and I know they're not maintained. In fact, some of them have gone. But this one is still there. So where will you find information? I've been saying that often information isn't available, but some information will be available on what I call supranational bodies, NGOs, or government organizations, public sector organizations like universities. Think back, why will information be available? If you're part of the United Nations, the UN is going to want to give out information. That's part of their, I suppose, marketing purpose, to show what they're doing. So you'll find information on every country in the world in UN databases. Similarly, governments will put out information that they want people to know. Universities want to let you know what they're researching in. Newspapers and online news will do the same sort of thing. So you've got those sort of macro type tools. Then obviously, I'm not really going to cover company and organizational web pages. If you're looking at a particular company, then you know the company you're looking at, go to their website, go to the local version of their website. So don't just look at Pepsi.com, but look at Pepsi.co.uk, Pepsi.fr. There can be differences. And sometimes those differences can also be relevant for other markets. So you might look at Pepsi.co.uk and get an indication of what's happening in the US as well, or what is going to happen. I once did a project where I found out that, in fact, it related to Pepsi. Pepsi was pilot testing a new product or a new variation in New Zealand. Why New Zealand? Well, it's in the, down south, a long way from anywhere else. But if you looked at New Zealand, you could find consumer views on this product, what people thought, their promotion, their adverts. You wouldn't find that anywhere else, and it was very, very useful for the client because it gave indications on what was going to be moved or what was going to be extended to other markets later on. So always consider that what you're looking at in one country could, at a later stage, move elsewhere. And then, of course, the social media and discussion forums. So supranational organizations, there's the World Bank, there's WHO, the United Nations, and all its agencies, and there are lots of them. There's the Organization for Economic Development, the OECD, there's the oil cartel, OPEC, there's NATO, and then there's regional bodies, lots of them. So in the European Union, there's Eurostat, there's a SPASnet, which basically is for patents, the European Central Bank, and then there's similar ones for other markets as well. And to give you a view of how many of these are, and all of them have some form of data, this comes from a Wikipedia page, but it gives you an idea of the number of what I call supranational organizations, ranging from the Commonwealth of Independent States, the European Union, the European Economic Area, the European Free Trade Association, the Gulf Economics of Consortium, and various others. There's in South America, there's Mercosur, there's NAFTA, and some of these are better than others. So see what data they have if you're looking at a particular area. This just gives some examples of United Nations websites, what they look at. So you've got data.un.org, has massive amount of data, 60 million records, 34 databases. And then the UNESCO has its own database that you can search as well. And that's just two of them. There's pretty much all will have some information. There's WHO, there's the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization. Also look at clinical trial data. If you're looking, don't just look at clinical trials in the US. There's also separate clinical trial databases in Europe, India, and sometimes if you want to try and hide a stage 1 or phase 1 research, you may start somewhere not in the US and only later on move to the US. So you're doing your first testings in a market that may not be so easy to find. So be aware of different clinical trial databases. Wikipedia has a list of them. This is the World Bank and gives you some of the ideas of what you can find on the World Bank. So if you're looking, I'm not sure why you might want to look at Eritrea, but if, for instance, you want to know about Eritrea as just one example, you'll find data on the World Bank on Eritrea of all sorts of things. You can also find world development indicators. Eurostat, massive amount of data. And I said the European Union has a lot of databases. The European Union website, the main European Union website is europa.eu, and there was all sorts of different bits. So this is the statistics bit of it. But one of the more interesting bits is what's known as TED, Tenders Electronic Daily. And this can be very useful if you're looking for information on companies in Europe that are likely to be dealing with the general public. Companies that are likely to be dealing with the public sector. So if you want to bid for a contract above a certain size, and I'm not sure offhand what it is, I think it's something like 50,000 euros, it might be 100,000 euros, but you want to bid for that contract, it has to go on what's known as Tenders Electronic Daily. So when any local authority, local council, government needs a supplier, they have to make that information public, and the companies need to bid for that information. So here I'm looking for an example for I think it was for HSBC. So I'm looking at the bank HSBC and which things have they been named at they've been pitching for. And sometimes you'll even get the size, if they win the contract, and how much the value of that contract actually is. You often also find who the other people who are bidding are. You don't normally find what they're bidding, but you'll find what the winner is. So it gives you an idea. And if you're looking at pitching within Europe, it's worth looking at Tenders Electronic Daily because you can get a lot of information on what people are likely to be bidding. Just one tip. Although there is a translation into English, sometimes there is more detail in the local language version because everything is translated. So if the tender is originally in Polish, you may get a lot more information in the Polish version than you will get in the English version, which means you need your Google Translate again. Looking at supranational organizations outside the European Union, you've got the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, you've got the Asian Stats, African data, lots of them. And again, it's worth finding out what these are. You can do a search looking for statistical information in some of these areas, and I'll come to another way in a second how to find them. Commercial information, it's always worth paying for information. DMB is a global company, so you can do a DMB on pretty much any country in the world. SkyMinder will give you the local version. Sometimes DMB is not as good in some countries or some markets as in others, and often they'll outsource it to a local credit bureau. Sometimes that local credit bureau isn't the main credit bureau. It's one that DMB has a relationship with, but for various reasons, you may not get from the main one. That's, for example, in the case of Germany, the main one is a company called Credit Reform, or Varian Credit Reform. Another database is Bureau Van Dijk, and then if you're looking at various information, the Economist Intelligence Unit, Compass will give you product information globally. Panjiva will give you export-import statistics, not for the whole world. So if you want to know export-import statistics between UK and Germany, tough luck. There's a common, at the moment anyway, there's a common trade, so there is no information about what goes between the UK and Germany that's easy to find. There are ways that you can estimate it, but if you want to know what's imported or exported into the US or into China, Panjiva will help you. MarketResearch.com for any sort of market type information globally. And then there's a number of free sources. The CIA Fact Book if you're looking for country information. Google Public Data gets data from the World Bank, IMF, Eurostat, over 100 other sources. Financial data free from Google Finance, Yahoo Finance, and a very interesting and useful website called ADVFN. I'm not sure what that stands for, but it gives a lot of statistical information. I'll come to the Offstats Database in a second, Investigative Dashboard, and also the Global Competitiveness Report. The World Economic Forum has a lot of research papers and a lot of research reports that if you're looking for country information or regional information can be very useful. This is the Offstats Database. Why the University of Auckland in New Zealand produced it, I haven't a clue, but it's probably the best source for finding statistical information on every country and region in the world. So in the example I've got Moldova, not very much information. There's the Department of Statistics and Sociology in Moldova and the National Bank of Moldova. But if you're looking at Mexico, a lot more information from various sources. So it's a way of finding out where you can find statistics or the economic information for a particular country. The Investigative Dashboard has recently changed and been expanded, so some of what's there is quite new. But if you're looking for financial information on pretty much any country in the world, you can find out what's going to be available by going onto the View Recommended Global Databases. And this lists the databases for particular countries or regions. So you can name the country, you can name Argentina, you can go look at global databases, databases for Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe. In this example, I'm just looking at Europe, and you go down Albanian Financial Supervision, Albania Supreme Court, the Anti-Corruption Agency of Serbia, the Anti-Corruption Commission of Slovenia, and so on. And some of these are tiny. San Marino is a little region that never became part of Italy. So whether you'd ever want to look there, I don't know, but it's there. And if you click on these, it'll take you to the main site. So here's the site for Finland. And again, I would search in Finnish, even if there is an English version. This is the English version. It knows that what I want, but if you look at the top, it's got Suomeksi, which will be the Finnish for Finland. And if you can search in Finnish, it's better. Or use a translation. This is an example of the Global Competitiveness Report, or their website. And there are a number of different databases. This is a heat map for Europe, showing that Germany is like ranked number 4 in its competitiveness. And you can see the different colors, that Germany is dark blue, so is the UK, so is Ireland, so is most of Scandinavia, so it's all of Scandinavia. But when you get to countries like Belarus, which is the grey one, it's pretty much, we don't even know what the figures are. Greece, not surprisingly, is not as competitive. And when you get to the Balkan states, a lot less competitive. So you have Croatia is okay, but Serbia and Montenegro and Albania, not very competitive. And there are a number of other databases here that you can look at as well. Now let's think about, you're looking for a competitor. Are they advertising jobs? Because obviously looking at job postings can be very, very useful. So again, let's look at a bank, and let's look at Citibank. And you can do this with Monster as well. I personally prefer CareerJet. I find it easier, but it's a question of familiarity. If you know Monster, use Monster. So CareerJet, looking for the title VP, company Citibank in Singapore, and there are 5 jobs. Now, this is just random, but you could look and say, okay, what are they doing? What are they doing in a particular region? Is there any indication there? I mentioned Bureau van Dijk. Bureau van Dijk has a large number of databases that are worth looking at globally, sometimes in a lot of detail, sometimes in less detail. They've been going for well over 20 years, probably 25 years. And initially they would have country reports, and they would, well, their first database was something called FAME, which stands for Financial Analysis Made Easy, and analyzes UK company statistics and UK company data. Then they brought out for other countries in Europe, AIDA for Italy, Daphne for Germany, Diane for France. They like to use girls' names. Then they moved on to that for industries, so you've got ISIS. In this case, information on insurance companies, nothing to do with a nasty organization. You have BankScope, but you also have databases like Oriana for Asia Pacific, and then you have UK public company profiles in Dash sort of shareholder reports, and there's the same sort of thing for China and other countries, and Amadeus for the whole of Europe. So a great source if you're looking for summary company information, mostly public, but databases like FAME will be pretty much all incorporated companies in the UK. So you have a mix of information there. MarketResearch.com. Years ago, I did a report on freight forwarders, and I was challenged, and I said, you won't find any report on freight forwarding in Turkey. There's no recent report, but at the time I was asked this, it was there. And this gives you an idea. So you just put in freight forwarders in marketresearch.com, and I can see the situation in Denmark, the Norwegian and Sweden, Finland, although Finland is spelt wrongly, which is interesting in itself, or global freight forwarding. And you can do this for pretty much any industry. So that's another source for finding information. Again, not free, but always look at the executive summary, because that might give you enough information to go by. News, lots of news sources, pay-to-use sources like ProQuest, Dialog, LexisNexis, Factiva, and so on. There's also a great site called newsnow.co.uk that's free. Consider Google News, Yahoo News, BBC, Newswires, Al Jazeera. It's always worth getting a different perspective, what's said in a different area. And then there's local news sources. If you want to find a local news source, newspapermap.com will tell you what you can find, or allyoucanread.com. I think newspaper map basically is a mashup showing news sources on a map in Google. I think allyoucanread.com is actually easier to use, where you select the country or select the region and it just lists out the newspapers. Again, then links to them. Broadcast media, one of the problems is sometimes these sites are only available in the local country. So BBC, for instance, is blocked, or the BBC, there's a thing called BBC iPlayer, so you can see all BBC stuff, and that's blocked if you're not in the UK. But if you use a download to Chrome called Hola, that allows you to pretend to be in the UK. I often listen to Pandora in the US using Hola. Pandora is blocked for the UK and most countries in the world. Then there's BitTorrent sites, YouTube, iTunes, various other sites to find information. A number of
Arthur?
Yeah?
Yeah, we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we have time to answer some of the questions. Can we?
I am wrapping up. I'll be finished in 3 or 4 minutes, so we can then do questions. Okay. A number of other sites. Again, when you get the download, you can look at these, and this gives you what they look like. Memory tends to be more propaganda, but there is sometimes good stuff on it. African Development Bank, if you're looking at Africa. And just to finish off, free trade statistics sources, 3 fabulous databases. I like Noema and Index Mundi better than Trading Economics, but they're all good for what they do. And you can drill down, so you can say things like how many passenger cars per 1,000 people in Spain. Hundreds and hundreds of databases, some of them totally useless, like Bangalore traffic statistics, but some of them are very useful. Noema, again, you can do R&D expenditure by country and do graphs and maps. Index Mundi, same sort of idea, and you can drill down, so Finland exports by category. Trading Economics, another database, looking more at things like GDP value for different countries. And finally, don't ignore social media. So you've got LinkedIn.com, I'm sure everyone knows. But in France and Francophone countries, Viadio is more popular. And in some countries, especially Germanic countries, Zing is more popular. Intellius and Spokio are pretty much only US, but there's People for other areas. And Facebook, you don't get in China. You've got to use something like WeChat, or if you want Twitter, something like Weibo, or some of the other ones. In Russia, VKontakte, Odnoklassniki, also consider, and again, you have to be willing to speak the language. Again, it's quite fun to try out, see how many friends you know in Russia. So just to finish off, and then we'll take questions, just some final rules. Don't follow any process blindly. Things change. What works for one country may not work for another. So don't repeat the routine approaches. You'll miss intelligence. Think why information will be available, where it'll be held, and if you don't know why it'll be available, what kind of resources would you need to check to find out? How will you get them? And then that's where you're using your Google searching. What keywords would you use to find out if something's there? Registry, if you're looking for a financial registry. Database, if you're looking for a database. And finally, what are you actually trying to achieve? What would satisfy your intelligence requirements? So I'll now take questions. We've got about 6-7 minutes, and hopefully that, I don't know how many there'll be available, but hopefully we'll be able to answer them all.
Yeah, the first one, Arthur, is can you play with the language settings for advanced Twitter searches to get slightly different results than if you search in English versus non-English?
Oh, help. You can do location searches, so you can go onto the advanced Twitter searching, and there is an option for advanced Twitter for location search. It's improved. When I used it first, there were a lot of locations that didn't come up with. You can also do location searches for LinkedIn, and I would thoroughly recommend, if you're searching on LinkedIn, to consider a location search. But always do a language search in Twitter. If you search in one of the biggest growth markets for Twitter is countries like Indonesia, because everything's done on the mobile phone. And people aren't going to be tweeting in English. They'll be tweeting in Bahasa, in other words, Indonesian. So use a translation to translate that. Similarly, search in Arabic. Okay, does that answer the question?
All right. One more question. What is the best way to find local health or medical organizations like the American Heart Association in the U.S.?
There are going to be local organizations. So, for instance, there's Cancer Research UK would be a cancer charity. There will be the the British Heart Association. And what you could do is you could put into Google Heart Association and then the country name, or go to google.co.uk if you're looking in the UK. But of course, if you're looking in France, putting in the word heart is probably not the thing to do. You'd need to use the French for heart, C-O-E-U-R, cœur, and you'd need to use something like that. You could also, if you're looking for cancer, you might, rather than use the word cancer, you might use the term like carcinoma or other terms as well. So always be willing to search in different language. And again, start searching Google. Any other questions?
Those are the only two that I had gotten. If anybody has any others, please send them forward. But I want to thank you again, Arthur, for all you've done, and thank again Roar WDC for sponsoring the webinar. We'll be having another webinar in the middle end of March. So we're getting coordinated now. And thanks everyone for attending. Arthur, there was a question about whether or not you'll be providing the slides as well.
I'll make it into a PDF, and then I'll make it available. Just, I'm going to come back very quickly to those questions I asked at the beginning. The languages, there was Arabic, there was Hebrew, there was Thai, there was Hindi, there was Korean, there was the final one was actually Esperanto, which I think people probably are less familiar with because nobody uses it anymore. And of course Russian and Chinese. And the reason that cars go for more miles per gallon in the UK than the USA is very simple. The US gallon is smaller than the UK gallon. So if I put 10 gallons into my automobile, I will go further on 10 UK imperial gallons than I will on 10 US gallons. And the underage drinking is a bigger problem in the USA than in Europe, because in Europe I can start drinking at the age of 18 and I start driving at the age of 17, and I can drink if somebody buys me the drink who's over 18 from the age of 14. So in other words, I can be drunk legally at the age of 17 or 18, and I'm allowed to drive. Whereas in the US, of course, it's the opposite. You can drive at 16, but you're not legally allowed to drink until over 21. So a 19-year-old drunk in the UK is not underage. A 90-year-old drunk in the US is underage. And I think the point about that is it shows the massive differences that there can be even between countries that think they speak the same language. So I think we're at the top of the hour now. We're just before, well, 1 minute before the hour. So I think that's it. Thank you very much, and I hope this has been useful.
Thank you again, Arthur.